As we begin our quiet journey through the Alps, with the road stretching gently ahead and the green hills rising on either side, it is easy to imagine that mountains are permanent things. They seem so still, so certain, so calmly enormous. They stand above towns and valleys like ancient guardians, as if they have always been there, watching the clouds pass, catching snow on their shoulders, and letting the seasons come and go around them. But mountains are not really still, not in the deep language of the earth. They are moving, changing, rising, cracking, crumbling, and being remade all the time. They only seem motionless because their lives are measured in millions of years, while ours are measured in mornings, meals, and the occasional dramatic sigh at a traffic sign. A mountain does not hurry. It does not need to. It has time. The Alps, through which we are travelling now, are among the most famous mountain ranges in the world. They stretch across Central Europe in a great arc, passing through or touching countries such as France, Switzerland, Italy, Austria, Germany, Slovenia, Liechtenstein, and Monaco. Their peaks, valleys, glaciers, forests, lakes, and passes have shaped human history for thousands of years. They have guided travellers, blocked armies, sheltered communities, fed rivers, inspired artists, and created landscapes so beautiful that people willingly drive hours just to stare at them and say, "Wow." But to understand the Alps, we have to travel far beyond human history, far beyond the Romans, medieval pilgrims, mountain villages, and modern roads. We have to go back into deep time, to a world before the Alps existed at all. Hundreds of millions of years ago, the surface of the Earth looked very different from the map we know today. The continents were not fixed in their familiar positions. They drifted slowly across the planet, carried by the movement of tectonic plates, enormous, rigid pieces of Earth's outer shell. These plates include both crust and the uppermost part of the mantle, forming what geologists call the lithosphere. They are not floating on an open sea of liquid rock, as we might imagine from a cartoon diagram, but moving slowly over a hotter, more ductile layer beneath them. The movement is incredibly slow, usually only a few centimeters a year, roughly the speed at which fingernails grow. But when something as vast as a continent moves for tens of millions of years, even the smallest pace becomes powerful. A few centimeters a year can open oceans, close oceans, split continents, raise mountains, and rearrange the face of the planet. There are several kinds of plate boundaries. At divergent boundaries, plates move apart, and new crust can form between them, often along mid-ocean ridges. At transform boundaries, plates slide sideways past each other, creating faults and earthquakes. And at convergent boundaries, plates move toward each other. This is where some of the most dramatic geological events happen. Oceanic crust can dive beneath another plate in a process called subduction. Volcanic arcs can form. Earthquakes can shake the crust. And when continents collide, mountain ranges can rise. The Alps are the result of just such a collision, though the story is not as simple as two neat continents politely bumping into each other like shopping trolleys in a supermarket. The geology of the alpine region is beautifully complicated. It involves Europe, Africa, and an important smaller plate often called the Adriatic Plate, or Adria. It also involves vanished ocean basins, fragments of crust, layers of sediment, folded rocks, thrust folds, and long episodes of pressure, uplift, and erosion. Before the Alps rose, there was an ocean. This ocean was part of the wider Tethys realm, an ancient marine world that once separated land masses that would eventually become parts of Europe and Africa. During the Mesozoic era, when dinosaurs walked the earth, this region was not a chain of snow-capped mountains. Much of it lay beneath warm, shallow seas. On the floors of those seas, sediments accumulated slowly. Tiny shells, mud, sand, lime-rich deposits, and the remains of marine organisms settled layer upon layer. Over millions of years, these sediments hardened into rock. Limestone, shale, sandstone, and other sedimentary rocks formed in quiet marine environments. This is one of the reasons why fossils of sea creatures can be found high in mountain ranges. It sounds absurd at first. A seashell on a mountain peak feels like nature has made a filing error. But it is one of the clearest clues to the history of mountain building. Rocks that once formed beneath the sea were later lifted thousands of meters into the air. The ancient ocean did not remain open forever. As the African plate, together with the Adriatic region, moved generally northward toward Europe, the oceanic crust between them began to disappear. Oceanic crust is denser than continental crust, so when it meets another plate at a convergent boundary, it is often forced downward into the mantle. This process is subduction. Subduction is one of the great engines of plate tectonics. It helps recycle oceanic crust back into the earth. It can produce earthquakes and volcanic activity. It can drag plates along and gradually close ocean basins. In the alpine story, parts of the ancient oceanic lithosphere were consumed as the plates converged. The ocean narrowed. The space between the continents shrank. The sediments that had gathered at the edges and floor of the ocean were squeezed, scraped, folded, and pushed. Eventually, the buoyant continental crust of Europe and the Adriatic/African system came into collision. Unlike dense oceanic crust, continental crust does not easily sink deep into the mantle. It is relatively light and thick, more like a stubborn loaf of bread than a thin, heavy plate. When two continental masses collide, neither one simply disappears beneath the other in a tidy fashion. Instead, the crust shortens, thickens, crumples, fractures, and stacks. Imagine pushing a rug across a wooden floor. The rug does not slide smoothly forward forever. It wrinkles into folds. Now imagine that the rug is made of rock, is many kilometers thick, and takes tens of millions of years to wrinkle. That, in a very sleepy and domestic sort of way, is one of the basic ideas behind a collisional mountain belt. In the Alps, layers of rock were folded and thrust over one another. Huge slabs of crust moved along faults, sometimes travelling many kilometres from where they first formed. Geologists call some of these large, displaced sheets of rock nappes, from a French word meaning tablecloth. It is a strangely cosy word for something so immense. A nappe can be a vast sheet of rock pushed over another, like a geological blanket folded across the crust. These nappes are one of the reasons the Alps are so geologically complex. Rocks that formed in different environments sometimes far apart from one another, were compressed together during the mountain building process. Some rocks originated from the European margin, others came from the Adriatic or African side. Others preserve traces of the vanished ocean that once lay between them. The Alps are not simply one block of stone lifted upward. They are a deep archive of collisions, oceans, sediments, pressure, heat, and movement. This mountain building process is known as orogeny. The term comes from Greek roots meaning mountain birth. The alpine orogeny was not a single moment when the Alps suddenly appeared. There was no dramatic Tuesday afternoon when Europe looked out of the window and found a mountain range where the sea used to be. Instead, the Alps formed over tens of millions of years, especially during the later part of the Mesozoic and into the Cenozoic era, with major phases of uplift and deformation continuing through time. Even today, the Alps are not completely finished. The region is still tectonically active. The plates and smaller crustal blocks are still adjusting. Earthquakes still occur. Parts of the range continue to rise while erosion constantly wears them down. Mountains are never only being built or only being destroyed. They are always in a balance, or sometimes a struggle, between uplift and erosion. Uplift raises the land. Erosion lowers it. Rivers cut into slopes. Glaciers carve valleys. Frost breaks rock apart. Landslides carry material downhill. Rain, wind, ice, and gravity work patiently, day after day, season after season. If tectonic forces lift mountains faster than erosion removes them, the range may grow higher. If erosion wins, peaks become rounded, valleys widen, and the mountains gradually soften with age. This is why mountains have such different shapes. Young or actively rising mountain ranges often have sharp peaks, steep slopes, and dramatic relief. Older mountain ranges, which have not been actively lifted for a very long time, may appear lower and more rounded because erosion has had more time to wear them down. The Alps are geologically young compared with ranges such as the Scottish Highlands or parts of the Appalachians, and that youth is one reason they remain so striking. When we look at a jagged alpine ridge, we are seeing the result of many forces working together. Tectonic pressure created the uplift and thickened the crust. Folding and faulting arranged the rocks into complex structures. Later, ice, water, weather, and gravity sculpted those rocks into the forms we recognize today. A mountain peak is not simply a pile of rock pushed upward. It is often what remains after everything around it has been cut away. This is a beautiful idea, really. Mountains are made both by rising and by losing. The earth lifts them, and then the world carves them into shape. The rocks themselves also matter. Different rocks resist erosion in different ways. Harder rocks may remain as ridges, cliffs, and summits, while softer rocks wear away more quickly, forming valleys, slopes, or gentler ground. Layers of limestone can produce pale cliffs, caves, and dramatic towers. Crystalline rocks, such as granite and gneiss, can form rugged peaks and strong ridges. Shales and softer sediments may create smoother landscapes where vegetation can more easily take hold. This is one reason why mountain landscapes feel so varied, even within the same range. One valley may open into soft green meadows, while another rises suddenly into bare grey walls. One slope may be forested, another rocky and exposed. The visible landscape is shaped by the hidden geology beneath it, the kind of rock, the direction of the layers, the faults running through them, and the long history of pressure and erosion. The Alps also have what geologists call a crustal route. Just as an iceberg has much more ice below the waterline than above it, a great mountain range is supported by thickened crust extending downward. When continental crust is compressed and piled up, it becomes thicker. The high mountains above are balanced by deeper crust below. This principle is part of isostasy, the way Earth's crust floats in gravitational balance on the denser material beneath. As erosion removes material from the surface, the crust can respond by rising slightly, much as a boat rises higher in the water when weight is removed. This means erosion does not simply destroy mountains. In a strange way, by taking weight away, it can also encourage continued uplift. The relationship between mountain building and mountain wearing is not a simple fight with one winner. It is more like a very slow conversation between forces deep inside the earth and forces at the surface. And then there is time. Time is the ingredient that makes all of this possible. To us, a rockfall seems sudden. An earthquake feels instant. A river in flood can change a slope in a day. But the making of a mountain range requires an almost unimaginable patience. The ocean opens. Sediments gather. Plates converge. Oceanic crust sinks. Continents collide. Rocks fold, fracture, heat, and rise. Rain falls, rivers cut, glaciers advance and retreat. Peaks sharpen. Valleys deepen. Forests arrive. Animals follow. Humans eventually build roads and tunnels and then complain about tolls, because apparently this is also part of civilization. The Alps are therefore not just scenery. They are a record of a vanished ocean, a continental collision, and millions of years of change. Every cliff face, every tilted layer, every valley wall carries a piece of that history. When we pass through the mountains, we are not simply travelling across a landscape, we are travelling across the remains of an ancient sea floor lifted into the sky. This is one of the most extraordinary facts about mountains. They turn the horizontal into the vertical. Sediments that once lay flat beneath warm water can become folded cliffs. Shells that settled in quiet marine mud can end up above the clouds. Rocks buried deep in the crust can be exposed at the surface after millions of years of uplift and erosion. Mountains reveal the inside of the earth by slowly opening it to view. In the Alps, this revelation is everywhere. The pale limestone cliffs, the dark metamorphic rocks, the folded layers, the high passes, the deep valleys, and the great peaks all belong to the same long story. It is a story of pressure, patience, and transformation. Nothing about it is hurried, and nothing about it is truly finished. As the road winds onward through the green slopes, it may seem as though the mountains are simply standing there, silent and complete. But beneath that silence is motion. Beneath the stillness is memory. The Alps remember the sea. They remember the closing ocean, the grinding plates, the buried sediments, the slow rise into cold air and snow. They remember glaciers, rivers, forests, travellers, and every season that has passed across their ridges. And perhaps that is why mountains feel so calming to look at. They remind us that even the most dramatic transformations can happen slowly, that pressure can create beauty, that what seems immovable is often changing in ways too gentle or too vast for us to notice. The Alps were not made in a moment. They were folded, lifted, broken, carved, and softened across deep time. So, as we continue this sleepy journey through the mountains, we can let the road carry us through more than scenery. We are moving through the architecture of the earth itself. Around us are the traces of ancient oceans, vanished worlds, and continents that travelled patiently toward one another until stone rose into sky. The mountains may look still, but they are still becoming. If the first story of the Alps is a story of pressure, collision, and deep time, then the second is a story of patience. After the mountains rose, they were not left untouched, standing in perfect silence like stone monuments newly placed upon the earth. They were immediately given to the sky, to weather, to gravity, to frost, to rain, to rivers, and eventually to ice. The Alps were built by tectonic forces, but they were shaped by water. Water is one of the quietest and most persistent sculptors on earth. It falls as rain, settles as snow, freezes into ice, gathers in streams, runs in rivers, seeps into cracks, expands when frozen, dissolves minerals, carries sediment, and slowly wears the world down grain by grain. It can seem gentle when it slides over a pebble or drips from a leaf, but given enough time, water can cut canyons, hollow caves, split cliffs, move boulders, and carve entire valleys. In the Alps, water appears in almost every form. It lies as snow on high ridges. It gathers as ice in glaciers. It gleams in lakes. It rushes as rivers through deep valleys. It falls from cliffs in waterfalls, sinks into limestone, emerges from springs, and travels eventually toward great European rivers that carry alpine water far beyond the mountains themselves. So, although mountains may seem to belong to rock, they also belong to water. Without water, the Alps would not have the same valleys, lakes, slopes, forests, meadows, or human roots. Water gives the mountains much of their visible shape. It is the artist that arrives after the architect. Long before modern roads wound through alpine valleys, and long before towns and farms took root along their lower slopes, the climate of Earth shifted through colder and warmer phases. During the Pleistocene epoch, often called the Ice Age, glaciers advanced and retreated again and again across mountain regions. These were not small decorative patches of snow, politely sitting on peaks for postcard purposes. These were powerful bodies of ice, thick, heavy, and moving. A glacier begins with snow. In high mountain areas where winters are cold and snowfall can be heavy, snow may survive through the summer instead of melting completely. When this happens, year after year, layer upon layer builds up. The lower layers are compressed by the weight above them. Snowflakes lose their delicate shapes and become granular ice. Over time, this compacted snow transforms into dense glacial ice. A glacier may look solid and still, but it flows. Very slowly, yes, because apparently glaciers are the introverts of the water cycle, but they do move. Gravity pulls the mass of ice downhill. The ice deforms under its own weight, and in many glaciers the base can slide over the rock beneath, helped by meltwater acting as a lubricant. The movement may be measured in centimeters or meters per day, depending on the glacier, the slope, the temperature, and the supply of snow and ice. This slow movement gives glaciers their power. A glacier is not simply ice sitting on a mountain. It is a river of ice, carrying rock, sand, and debris within it and beneath it. As it moves, it grinds against the landscape. Stones frozen into the base of the glacier scrape the bedrock below like enormous sandpaper. This process is called abrasion. At the same time, meltwater can enter cracks in the rock, freeze, expand, and help loosen pieces that the glacier then pulls away. This process is known as plucking. Together, abrasion and plucking allow glaciers to carve the mountains. They deepen valleys, smooth rock surfaces, sharpen ridges, scoop out basins, and transport huge amounts of material. Where rivers tend to cut narrow V-shaped valleys, glaciers often create broad U-shaped valleys with steep sides and flatter floors. This is one of the classic signatures of glaciation. When you drive through an alpine valley, especially one with high walls and a wide floor, you may be travelling through a landscape that ice helped shape long before the road existed. The valley may have begun as a river valley, narrow and V-shaped, but during glacial periods it was filled with ice. The glacier widened and deepened it, pushing against its sides and floor, leaving behind a much broader trough. Later, when the ice retreated, rivers returned to the valley floor, sometimes looking almost too small for the enormous space around them. It is as if a tiny stream has moved into a palace and is trying to act casual about it. Many alpine valleys show this glacial inheritance. The road may follow a flat valley floor where farms, villages, railways, or rivers now lie. The valley walls rise steeply, sometimes with waterfalls dropping from side valleys above. These side valleys are often called hanging valleys. They form because smaller tributary glaciers could not erode as deeply as the larger main glacier. When the ice melted away, the smaller valleys were left perched above the main valley floor. Streams flowing through them now tumble down as waterfalls. This is one of the reasons alpine landscapes can feel so theatrical. The mountains are not simply high, they are deeply carved. The difference between valley floor and peak can be immense, and that contrast creates the drama. Green pastures below, cliffs above, snow higher still, and water falling through the layers. High in the mountains, glaciers also carve cirques. A cirque is a bowl-shaped hollow, usually found near the head of a valley or high on a mountainside. It is where snow accumulated and compacted into ice, and where the early movement of a glacier scraped and hollowed the rock. After the glacier retreats, a small lake may remain in the basin. Such lakes are called tarns. These high mountain lakes can look peaceful, almost secretive, held in stone basins beneath ridges and peaks. But their calm surfaces hide a violent origin. They are often the result of ice grinding patiently into rock, deepening a hollow over long periods of time. The glacier leaves, the meltwater remains, and suddenly a place of pressure and erosion becomes a place of reflection. Nature does enjoy a dramatic rebrand. Glaciers also shape ridges and peaks. When glaciers erode on several sides of a mountain, they can sharpen the rock between them into narrow ridges called arêtes. Where several cirques cut back into a mountain from different directions, they can leave a pointed, pyramid-like peak known as a horn. The most famous example in the Alps is the Matterhorn, whose dramatic form is partly the result of glacial erosion acting from multiple sides. This is important because it reminds us that mountains are not only pushed upward from below, their familiar silhouettes are also carved from above and around. A peak may owe its height to tectonic uplift, but its sharpness may owe much to ice. A valley may owe its position to faulting or rock structure, but its broad shape may owe much to glaciers. The mountain landscape is a collaboration between deep earth forces and surface processes. Glaciers do not only erode, they also carry and deposit. As they move, they pick up rock fragments of all sizes, from fine powder to enormous boulders. Some debris falls onto the glacier from valley walls. Some is frozen into the ice. Some is scraped from the bedrock below. When the glacier melts, this material is left behind. One of the main materials left behind by glaciers is called till. Till is a mixture of many different sizes of sediment, fine clay, sand, gravel, stones, and sometimes enormous boulders, all carried together by the ice. Unlike rivers, which often separate material by weight and size as the water flows, glaciers tend to carry everything at once. When the ice melts, all that material is left behind together, creating a rough, mixed deposit that tells us where the glacier once moved. Glaciers are not tidy little librarians separating sediment by size. Rivers often sort material because flowing water carries lighter particles farther than heavier ones. Glaciers, by contrast, can transport almost anything frozen into or carried by the ice, then leave it in a glorious geological pile. Glaciers also leave evidence behind in the form of moraines. A moraine is a ridge, mound, or long line of rocky material that has been carried and left behind by a glacier. It can include everything from fine clay and sand to gravel, stones, and enormous boulders. These moraines are like the glacier's footprints. Even after the ice has melted away, they show us where the glacier once moved, where its edges were, and sometimes how far it reached. Different kinds of moraines form in different parts of the glacier. A lateral moraine forms along the side of a glacier, where broken rock collects between the moving ice and the valley wall. If two glaciers flow together, their inner side moraines can join and create a dark stripe of debris running down the middle of the combined glacier. This is called a medial moraine. Then there's a terminal moraine, which forms at the furthest point the glacier reached, where material builds up near the glacier's front edge. When the ice later retreats, that ridge remains behind, almost like a natural marker saying, the glacier came this far. There can also be ground moraine, where a more uneven blanket of sediment is left spread across the valley floor, and recessional moraines, which form when a retreating glacier pauses for a while and leaves another ridge behind. Together, these moraines help geologists reconstruct the glacier's journey. They show not only that ice once filled the valley, but also how it moved, where it stopped, and how it gradually withdrew. These moraines can influence what happens next. They may dam water and help create lakes. They may affect drainage patterns. They may become unstable as ice melts. They may be colonized by plants, slowly turning raw glacial debris into soil and eventually into meadow or forest. The end of a glacier is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of a new landscape. The lakes of the Alps owe much to this glacial past. Some fill basins scoured by ice, some are held behind moraines, some occupy over-deepened valleys where glaciers carved the rock below the level of the surrounding outlet. Large alpine lakes, such as Lake Geneva, Lake Constance, Lake Como, Lake Garda, and many others around the region, are connected to the story of ice, erosion, and mountain drainage. They are not simply pretty blue things placed conveniently for tourism and dramatic balcony breakfasts. They are geological records. Glacial lakes are often long, deep, and narrow, following the shape of former valleys. Their waters can appear strikingly blue, green, or turquoise, partly because of fine particles known as glacial flour. This rock flour is created when glaciers grind bedrock into very fine sediment. When carried into lakes and rivers, these particles can remain suspended in the water and scatter light, producing those luminous colours that look almost unreal. The water is not secretly enchanted, although frankly, it is doing a suspiciously good impression. Rivers continue the work of glaciers. When ice melts, the water flows downhill, gathering into streams that join into rivers. Alpine rivers are often fed by snowmelt, rainfall, springs, and glacial meltwater. Their flow changes with the seasons. In spring and summer, melting snow and ice can increase discharge. Heavy rainfall can quickly swell streams, especially on steep slopes. In winter, much water may be stored as snow and ice, waiting for warmer months to release it. These rivers carry sediment away from the mountains. They cut channels into valley floors, undercut banks, polish stones, build floodplains, and transport material toward lower regions. The Alps are sometimes called the water tower of Europe because so many major river systems receive water from alpine snow, glaciers, and rainfall. Rivers such as the Rhine, Rhone, Po, and Inn are connected to alpine sources or alpine drainage. Water that begins as snow high in the mountains may eventually pass through cities, farms, wetlands, and seas far away. This makes the Alps important far beyond their immediate scenery. Their snowpack and glaciers store water. Their rivers support agriculture, drinking water, ecosystems, transport, and hydroelectric power. The mountain landscape is not separate from the lowlands. It feeds them. But water in the mountains is never only gentle. On steep slopes, it can become sudden and destructive. Heavy rain, rapid snowmelt, or glacial lake outbursts can trigger floods. Water entering cracks in rock can freeze and expand, helping break cliffs apart. Saturated slopes can fail in landslides or debris flows. Mountain streams can shift boulders and reshape channels during storms. The same water that nourishes valleys can also unsettle them. Freeze-thaw weathering is especially important in cold mountain environments. Water seeps into cracks during the day or during warmer conditions. When temperatures drop below freezing, the water expands as it turns to ice. This expansion puts pressure on the surrounding rock. Repeated many times, it can widen cracks and eventually break pieces away. The broken rock may collect as scree at the base of cliffs, forming slopes of angular fragments. Gravity then takes over, moving material downhill little by little or suddenly in rockfalls. In limestone regions of the Alps, water also works chemically. Rainwater absorbs carbon dioxide from the air and soil, becoming weakly acidic. Over long periods, it can dissolve limestone, creating caves, sinkholes, underground streams, and karst landscapes. This kind of erosion is less visibly dramatic than a glacier grinding down a valley, but it is powerful in its own quiet way. Drop by drop, water enters stone and makes hidden worlds. So the shape of the Alps is not made by one process alone. It is built from tectonic uplift, carved by glaciers, cut by rivers, cracked by frost, dissolved by water, and moved by gravity. A single valley may contain evidence of all these forces. Its broad U-shape may tell of ice. Its river channel tells of flowing water. Its cliffs show rock structure. Its side slopes show weathering and landslides. Its lake may mark a basin carved or dammed by glacial action. Its fields and villages occupy the spaces made possible by all of this previous change. And through it all, climate plays a central role. Glaciers grow when snowfall exceeds melting over long periods. They shrink when melting exceeds snowfall. During colder phases of Earth's past, alpine glaciers expanded far down into valleys. During warmer phases, they retreated upward. This advance and retreat happened repeatedly, leaving overlapping traces that geologists study to understand past climates. Today, alpine glaciers are shrinking rapidly in response to modern climate warming. This is not just a visual change, although the loss of ice from famous landscapes is striking. It affects water storage, river flow, hazards, ecosystems, tourism, and cultural memory. As glaciers retreat, they expose bare rock and unstable slopes that were once held or covered by ice. New lakes can form. Plant life begins to colonize fresh ground. Streams change. Old routes become dangerous. The mountains continue to transform, but now some of those changes are happening quickly enough for human lifetimes to witness. Still, even as glaciers retreat, their past remains written across the Alps. We can read it in the valley shapes, lake basins, polished rocks, moraines, hanging valleys, and high cirques. The ice may have withdrawn from many places, but its signature remains. The landscape remembers. And perhaps that is what makes alpine water so fascinating. It is never just water. Snow on a ridge is future river. A glacier is old snow turned into moving stone carver. A lake is a pause in the downhill journey. A river is a road that makes itself. A waterfall is gravity made visible. Even mist rising from a valley is part of the same endless cycle, lifting water back into the sky so it can return again. As we continue along the mountain road, the scenery around us may look peaceful, but almost every curve of the valley has been shaped by motion. The wide floor beneath the road may have once held ice hundreds of meters thick. The slopes above may have been scraped by glaciers, split by frost, and washed by rain. The stream beside the road may be carrying tiny fragments of mountains away, one grain at a time. There is something deeply calming in that thought. The mountains are vast, but they are not rigid. They are shaped by small repeated acts. Snowfall after snowfall, drop after drop, freeze after freeze, melt after melt. Nothing happens all at once, and yet everything changes. The Alps were lifted by the collision of continents, but water gave them their valleys, their lakes, their shining rivers, and much of their visible beauty. Ice carved the great corridors. Rivers stitched them together. Lakes held the light. Snow returned every winter, and meltwater carried the mountains slowly toward the sea. So, as the road winds on, past green hills and steep slopes, we can imagine the hidden story beneath the calm view. The mountains around us are not merely stone. They are stone remembered by water. They are ancient pressure softened by snow. They are the work of glaciers that moved like slow rivers through time, and rivers that still move like silver threads through the valleys. The Alps are still being carved. And somewhere ahead, every drop of water is still on its journey. After the mountains have been raised by tectonic force, and after ice and water have carved their valleys, another quieter transformation begins. Life arrives. At first, it may seem strange to think of mountains as living places. From a distance, they can look like enormous structures of stone and snow, too steep, too cold, too exposed for anything soft or fragile. Their highest ridges seem almost beyond the reach of ordinary life, belonging more to cloud, wind, and weather than to leaves and roots. But mountains are full of life. Not life in the easy, generous way of a warm lowland forest or a sheltered river valley, where soil can deepen, seasons are longer, and plants can grow tall without constantly being bullied by gravity and weather. Mountain life is different. It is tougher, slower, more strategic. It has learned to survive thin soils, short summers, heavy snow, fierce winds, intense sunlight, cold nights, steep slopes, and sudden changes in weather. The Alps especially are not simply bare peaks rising above Europe. They are layered worlds. As the land rises, climate changes with height. Temperature usually falls. Winds strengthen. Snow lasts longer. The growing season becomes shorter. The soil becomes thinner and less stable. The plants change too, forming broad zones of vegetation that climb the mountainsides like quiet bands of colour. At lower elevations, depending on location, slope, climate, and human land use, the Alps may begin with meadows, fields, orchards, vineyards, and broad-leaved forests. On warmer southern slopes, closer to Italy and the Mediterranean world, the vegetation can feel softer and more sunlit, with chestnut, oak, hop hornbeam, and other trees that enjoy milder conditions. In some valleys, vines and fruit trees have been cultivated for centuries because mountains do not only create cold, they also create shelter, exposure, and astonishingly local climates. This is one of the first secrets of mountain plant life. Altitude is crucial, but it is never the only thing that matters. A sunny south-facing slope can be much warmer and drier than a shaded north-facing slope at the same height. A deep valley may trap cold air. A ridge may be blasted by wind. A rocky slope may drain quickly, while a meadow hollow may stay damp. Snow may linger in one place for weeks longer than another nearby patch of ground. Mountains create microclimates, tiny local worlds, and plants respond to them with exquisite precision. As we climb higher, broad-leaved trees often give way to coniferous forests. Spruce, fir, larch, pine, and Swiss stone pine become increasingly important in many alpine regions. These forests are not just decoration, they are part of the mountain's protective skin. A forest holds soil in place with its roots. It slows the fall of rain onto the ground. It shades snow and influences how quickly it melts. It can reduce erosion and help protect slopes from shallow landslides. In some places, mountain forests also help limit avalanches because standing trees break up snow layers and interrupt the path of sliding snow. This is why forests have historically been so valuable to alpine communities. They provided timber, fuel, pasture boundaries, tools, resin, shelter, and protection. Of course, humans have also changed these forests. For thousands of years, people have cleared land for grazing, hay meadows, villages, roads, mining, and timber. Some alpine landscapes that look completely natural are actually shaped by long human use. Meadows filled with flowers may exist because forests were cleared and the land was mown or grazed. Pastures high above villages may reflect centuries of seasonal movement when cattle, sheep, and goats were taken upward in summer to feed on mountain grass. So when we see an alpine meadow, we may be looking at both nature and culture together. The flowers may be wild, the grasses may be native, the pollinators may be doing their ancient work, but the open space itself may have been maintained by human hands, scythes, animals, and seasonal tradition. The Alps are not a wilderness untouched by people. They are a living landscape where geology, climate, plants, animals, and human history have been braided together for a very long time. Higher still, the forest begins to thin. Trees become shorter. Their trunks may twist under snow pressure and wind. Growth slows. Seedlings struggle to establish. Eventually, we reach the tree line, the upper limit where trees can grow in a sustained way. Above it lies the alpine zone, where conditions are too harsh for upright forest. The tree line is not a perfectly straight line wrapped around the mountain like a tidy ribbon. Nature, tragically, has not read the spreadsheet. The tree line rises and falls depending on local conditions. It may be higher on sunny slopes and lower on colder or windier ones. It can be lowered by grazing, logging, avalanche paths, poor soils, or exposure. It can shift over time with climate, but as a general idea, the tree line marks one of the great transitions in mountain ecology. The place where the forest gives way to dwarf shrubs, grasses, sedges, mosses, lichens, and flowering alpine plants. Above the tree line, life becomes lower to the ground. This is one of the most obvious features of alpine plants. Many grow as mats, rosettes, cushions, or small clumps pressed close to the surface. This shape is not accidental. Near the ground, conditions can be slightly warmer and less windy. Rocks absorb heat from the sun and release it slowly. A cushion shape reduces exposure, traps a little warmth and moisture, and protects delicate growing points from drying winds. In a landscape where the air can be cold even in summer, hugging the earth is a very sensible life choice. Alpine plants also tend to be perennial, meaning they live for more than 1 year. This is useful because the growing season is short. If a plant has only a few weeks or months to grow, flower, set seed, and prepare for winter, it helps to have roots and stored energy already in place. Many alpine plants spend years building a strong root system before producing much visible growth. Some grow very slowly. A tiny plant may be much older than it looks, which is rude but inspirational. Roots are especially important in mountain environments. Soil may be thin, rocky, unstable, or low in nutrients. A strong root system anchors the plant against wind, frost heave, erosion, and the constant possibility that the slope may decide to rearrange itself without asking. Roots also help plants reach water and nutrients in cracks between stones. Some alpine plants invest more energy below ground than above it, because survival begins with holding on. The short alpine summer is intense. Once the snow melts, plants must act quickly. There may be only a brief window for growth and reproduction before cold returns. This is why alpine flowers can seem so surprisingly bright and abundant. Meadows that were recently under snow may suddenly burst into colour. Gentians, saxifrages, primroses, anemones, buttercups, orchids, alpine asters, and many others. It is not laziness followed by drama. It is timing. Many alpine flowers are vivid because they need to attract pollinators quickly. Insects also have a limited season at high elevations, so plants compete for attention in a compressed calendar. Bright colours, strong shapes, and sometimes warmth-trapping flower structures can help. Some flowers are bowl-shaped and can act like little solar collectors, warming the reproductive parts of the plant and offering insects a slightly more comfortable place to visit. A flower in the mountains is not merely pretty, it is a tiny survival machine wearing a charming outfit. One of the most famous alpine flowers is Edelweiss. Its pale, woolly, star-shaped bracts have become a symbol of the Alps, associated with rugged slopes, romance, mountaineering, and the slightly theatrical human habit of turning a plant into a national mood. Edelweiss is adapted to high, sunny, rocky places. Its woolly covering helps protect it from cold, drying winds and strong ultraviolet radiation. Like many beloved wild plants, it has also needed protection from overpicking because humans are adorable but cannot always be trusted near symbolic flowers. We see a rare plant and immediately think, what if I removed it from the ecosystem and put it in a book? Another famous group of alpine plants includes gentians, whose deep blue flowers are often associated with mountain meadows. Their colour can be astonishing, almost too intense for such a harsh environment. Alpine roses, or rhododendrons, can form low shrubby communities near and above the tree line, especially in acidic soils. Saxifrages grow in rocky crevices and scree, their name linked to the idea of breaking stone because they often appear to emerge from impossible cracks. Mosses and lichens colonize bare rock, helping begin the slow process of soil formation. Lichens are especially important pioneers. A lichen is not a single organism in the ordinary sense, but a partnership, usually between a fungus and a photosynthetic partner such as an alga or cyanobacterium. Together, they can survive where many plants cannot. They grow on rock, bark, and exposed surfaces, enduring cold, dryness, and intense light. Over long periods, lichens contribute to the weathering of rock and the creation of the first thin organic layers in places where soil is almost absent. Mosses also thrive in many mountain habitats, especially where moisture gathers. They can grow in cushions and carpets, holding water like tiny green sponges. In wet, alpine meadows, around springs, along streams, and in snowbeds where meltwater lingers, mosses and small flowering plants form delicate communities adapted to cold and saturation. These habitats may look modest, but they are ecologically rich. Snowbeds are one of the more quietly fascinating alpine habitats. These are places where snow remains late into the growing season. Plants living there must tolerate a very short summer, but they may also benefit from protection. Snow insulates the ground against extreme winter cold and shields plants from drying winds. Once it melts, it provides water. The plants of snowbeds often grow quickly, flower close to the ground, and complete their seasonal cycle with impressive efficiency. They are the botanical equivalent of someone writing an entire essay the night before it is due, except they do it every year and somehow make it beautiful. Scree slopes are another difficult habitat. Scree is loose rock that has collected below cliffs or on steep slopes. It shifts, drains quickly, and may bury or expose plants depending on movement. Yet some alpine plants are adapted to it. They may have long, flexible roots or shoots that can survive being partially covered. Some appear scattered and fragile, but beneath the surface they may be strongly anchored. Life in scree is a slow negotiation with instability. In rock crevices, plants find shelter from wind and a little more moisture than exposed surfaces provide. Seeds may lodge in cracks where dust, organic matter, and tiny particles of weathered rock accumulate. Over time, a small plant can establish itself in what seems like no soil at all. From the road, a cliff may look bare. Up close, it may hold lichens, mosses, ferns, grasses, and flowers tucked into ledges and fractures. This is one of the loveliest truths about mountain plants. They do not need the mountain to be easy. They only need a chance. A crack, pocket of soil, a few weeks of sun, a little meltwater, a sheltered hollow. Life does not cover the high Alps evenly, but it appears wherever conditions allow, often in forms so small they can be missed unless we slow down. The distribution of alpine plants also reflects the ice ages. During glacial periods, much of the high mountain landscape was covered by ice, and cold-adapted species could spread into lower areas. During warmer periods, plants moved upward again or survived in refuges, places where local conditions allowed them to persist. Some alpine plants have relatives in Arctic regions because cold habitats were once more connected during glacial times. Today, high mountain zones can act like islands of cold climate separated by warmer lowlands. This creates both richness and vulnerability. Alpine plants are often highly specialized. They may be adapted to narrow temperature ranges, particular soils, specific snow conditions, or short growing seasons. As climate warms, the suitable zone for some species may shift upward. But mountains have a limit. A plant can move higher only until there is no higher ground left, or until the right soil, moisture, or exposure is missing. The phrase moving uphill sounds simple until the hill runs out. The plant life of the Alps also shapes the lives of animals, which we will meet more fully in the next chapter. Alpine meadows feed insects, marmots, ibex, chamois, cattle, sheep, and many smaller creatures. Flowers support bees, butterflies, flies, beetles, and other pollinators. Shrubs provide shelter. Seeds and berries feed birds and mammals. Forests shelter deer, owls, woodpeckers, lynx, and countless invertebrates. The entire mountain food web begins with plants and the sunlight they capture. Plants also influence water. Forests slow runoff. Meadows absorb rainfall and snowmelt. Roots stabilize soil. Peatlands and wetlands store water. Vegetation affects how quickly water moves from slope to stream, which matters in a landscape shaped by floods, avalanches, and erosion. The green life of the mountains is therefore not just a covering over the geology, it is part of the mountain's functioning body. And then there is the human relationship with alpine plants. For centuries, mountain communities depended on forests for timber and fuel, meadows for hay, pastures for grazing, and herbs for medicine, food, and flavour. Alpine plants entered folklore, seasonal rituals, healing traditions, and local economies. Hay meadows were cut by hand. Cattle were moved upward in summer. Cheese-making traditions developed around mountain pastures. Forest rules and protections emerged because communities understood that cutting too much could bring erosion, avalanches, and danger. In many alpine regions, the beauty people admire today is partly the result of this long relationship. Flower-rich meadows, open pastures, larch woods, and village landscapes often reflect generations of careful use. When traditional mowing or grazing stops, shrubs and trees may return, changing the habitat. When grazing is too intense, delicate plants may decline. The balance is complicated because mountain landscapes are never just one thing. They are ecosystems, workplaces, homes, memory, scenery, and science, all inconveniently happening at once. As the road carries us through the Alps, the vegetation tells us where we are. Broad leaves and orchards may speak of lower valleys and milder air. Dark conifers may show that we have climbed into cooler forests. Open meadows may reveal human use, avalanche paths, or land above the forest. Dwarf shrubs and low flowers may tell us we are near the tree line or beyond it. Bare rock and lichen may mark the highest, harshest places where life becomes sparse, but never entirely absent. The mountains are readable if we know how to look. A slope covered in larch may glow golden in autumn because larches, unlike most conifers, drop their needles for winter. A Swiss stone pine may tell of high, cold forests and long adaptation to severe conditions. Rhododendron shrubs may mark acidic soils near the upper forest. Limestone cliffs may host different flowers from silicate rocks. A wet hollow may hold sedges and mosses, while a dry ridge supports tough, low mats. Every plant is a clue. And every plant is also a small act of defiance. To grow in the mountains is to accept difficulty as normal. The season is short, the wind is rude, the soil is stingy. Snow may arrive late or leave early. Frost can return after flowering has begun. Sunlight can be intense, but warmth unreliable. Water can be abundant during snowmelt and scarce later on exposed slopes. Yet plants have found ways to live here. By staying low, growing slowly, storing energy, and flowering quickly, forming partnerships with fungi and using protective hairs, deep roots, leathery leaves, cushion shapes, and careful timing. The result is not a poor version of lowland nature. It is its own world. A mountain meadow in bloom is not beautiful despite hardship, but because of the precise adaptations that hardship has produced. The colours, shapes, and patterns are survival strategies made visible. So, when we look from the road at the green hills of the Alps, or at forests climbing toward the cloud line, or at meadows opening between slopes, we are not seeing softness laid over stone. We are seeing life negotiating with altitude. We are seeing sunlight turned into leaf, root, flower, berry, bark, and seed in one of Europe's most demanding landscapes. The Alps were born from the collision of continents. They were carved by glaciers and rivers, but they are softened, held, coloured, and animated by plants. Without forests, the valleys would be harsher and more unstable. Without meadows, the slopes would lose much of their seasonal richness. Without mosses and lichens, bare rock would remain bare for longer. Without alpine flowers, the high world would have fewer insects, fewer seeds, fewer stories, and far less wonder. The secret life of mountains is not only hidden in their rocks, it is also in the tiny roots gripping cracks above the road, in the larch needles trembling in clean air, in the moss holding melt water, in the flowers racing through a short summer, and in the old forests standing between village and avalanche slope. The mountains may appear still, but their living skin is always changing. Leaves open, snow melts, seeds wait, roots deepen, meadows bloom and fade. Forests climb, retreat, burn, regrow, and shift. Even the smallest cushion plant is part of the long story of the Alps, a story written not only in stone and ice, but in green. And as we continue onward, through valleys shaped by ancient glaciers and slopes dressed in forest and flower, we can imagine the mountain breathing quietly around us. Not loudly, not quickly, but patiently, leaf by leaf. Once plants have climbed the mountainsides, life becomes more complicated. Leaves catch sunlight, flowers feed insects, roots hold soil, forests offer shelter, meadows open like green rooms between slopes. And into these living spaces come animals. Some move quietly through the trees, some whistle from burrows, some balance on cliffs with a level of confidence that feels frankly unnecessary. Some sleep through winter, some change colour with the seasons, some circle above the valleys on rising air. Some return only after centuries of persecution, stepping carefully back into a landscape that once pushed them to the edge of disappearance. The animals of the Alps live in a world of vertical choices. A few hundred meters of elevation can mean a different temperature, different plants, different snow cover, different predators, different dangers, and different opportunities. In a lowland forest, an animal may move mostly across a landscape. In the mountains, it often moves up and down as well. The Alps are not only wide, they are tall. This vertical world creates a constant rhythm of adaptation. In summer, high meadows burst briefly into abundance. Insects emerge, flowers bloom, grasses grow, marmots feed. Chamois and ibex climb into open ground. Birds nest quickly while food is available. But winter changes everything. Snow covers feeding grounds, temperatures fall, days shorten. Movement becomes costly. Food becomes scarce. Every animal must have a strategy. One of the most famous alpine strategies belongs to the marmot. The alpine marmot is a large ground squirrel, social, sturdy, and rather charming in the way of an animal that looks permanently surprised by its own responsibilities. Marmots live in colonies, often in open alpine meadows and pastures where they dig burrow systems. During the warmer months, they feed heavily on grasses, herbs, flowers, seeds, and roots, building fat reserves for the long winter ahead. Their alarm calls are one of the classic sounds of high mountain meadows. When a marmot detects danger, perhaps a fox, eagle, or human walker, it may give a sharp whistle that sends others diving toward the safety of their burrows. A meadow that seemed peaceful a moment before can suddenly become a small underground neighborhood with very strict security protocols. Marmots survive winter by hibernating. This is not simply a long, cozy nap, although honestly, the branding is excellent. Hibernation is a deep physiological state in which body temperature drops, heart rate slows, breathing becomes much slower, and energy use is dramatically reduced. Marmots retreat into underground chambers, often huddling together, and live off the fat they stored during summer. In a mountain environment where food may be buried beneath snow for months, hibernation is not laziness. It is precision survival. Other animals do not sleep through winter. They stay active and must find ways to endure cold, snow, and hunger. The alpine ibex is one of the great symbols of this kind of mountain life. With its powerful body, strong legs, and curved horns, the ibex seems almost designed by someone who looked at a cliff and thought, "Yes, but what if we put a goat on it?" Ibex live in steep, rocky terrain, often above the forest. Their hooves are beautifully adapted for climbing. The outer edges are hard, providing grip on rock, while the softer inner pads help them hold uneven surfaces. They can move across ledges and slopes that would make most of us reconsider every life decision that led us there. Steepness protects them. Predators have a harder time reaching them, and in winter, wind and avalanches can sweep snow from exposed slopes, leaving patches of grass and other vegetation accessible. The history of the alpine ibex is also a story of human impact and conservation. Once widespread across the Alps, ibex were heavily hunted for meat, horns, and supposed medicinal value. By the early 19th century, they had nearly disappeared from the entire range, surviving mainly in the Gran Paradiso area of the Italian Alps. From that remnant population, ibex were later reintroduced to other parts of the Alps. Their return is one of the better-known conservation successes in European mountain wildlife. It is also a reminder that natural landscapes often carry scars of human choices, and sometimes, with enough effort and humility, a little repair. The chamois is another agile mountain ungulate, smaller and more delicate-looking than the ibex, but astonishingly capable on steep ground. Chamois are related to goats and antelopes, and are found in rocky slopes, alpine meadows, and mountain forests. They are flexible in their habitat use, moving between elevations with the seasons. In winter, they may descend into forested areas where snow cover is less severe and shelter is better. In summer, they may graze in higher alpine pastures. Chamois have excellent balance and speed. Their hooves help them grip rough terrain, and their bodies are built for quick movement across slopes. They feed on grasses, herbs, shoots, leaves, and lichens, depending on season and availability. Like so many mountain animals, they must manage energy carefully. Running through deep snow wastes precious reserves. Feeding in exposed places can invite predators. Resting too long in the wrong place can mean hunger. Mountain life is beautiful, yes, but it is also an aggressively complicated spreadsheet of calories and risk. Above the meadows and rocky slopes, birds use the mountain air in ways land animals cannot. The golden eagle is one of the Alps' most powerful birds of prey. With broad wings and extraordinary eyesight, it soars over valleys, ridges, and open slopes, searching for mammals and birds such as marmots, hares, grouse, and sometimes carrion. Mountain landscapes suit eagles because rising warm air or thermals can help them gain height and travel efficiently. From above, the Alps become a hunting ground drawn in ridges, shadows, and movement. Golden eagles usually nest on cliffs or in large trees, depending on the region, and breeding pairs may hold large territories. Their presence tells us something about the health and openness of mountain habitats. They need space, nesting sites, and prey. They also need a landscape where human disturbance does not constantly interrupt breeding and hunting. To see an eagle circling above an alpine valley is to see not just a bird, but an entire food web lifted into the air. Even more specialized is the bearded vulture, one of the most remarkable birds of the alpine world. Unlike many raptors, the bearded vulture feeds largely on bones. It can swallow smaller bones whole, while larger bones may be dropped from height onto rocks to break them open. Then, the bird feeds on the marrow and fragments. This sounds slightly dramatic, but honestly, if your ecological role is bone specialist of the high mountains, you are allowed a little theatre. The bearded vulture was once exterminated from the Alps, partly because people misunderstood it and feared it as a threat to livestock or even children. These fears were wildly exaggerated, but wildlife has often paid dearly for human imagination having a bad day. Reintroduction programs began in the late 20th century, and bearded vultures now once again fly in parts of the alpine region. Their return is a powerful example of how conservation can restore not only a species, but a missing ecological role. A scavenger is not a gloomy accessory to nature. It is part of nature's cleaning, recycling, and balance. Scavengers matter deeply in mountain ecosystems. Dead animals do not simply vanish. Their bodies become food for vultures, eagles, foxes, ravens, beetles, bacteria, fungi, and soil organisms. Nutrients return to the land. Nothing is wasted. In a harsh environment where energy is precious, carrion can support many forms of life. The death of one animal becomes part of the survival of others, which is a little intense for bedtime, yes, but also strangely peaceful when you think about it as continuity rather than ending. In the forests and lower slopes of the Alps, larger carnivores have a more complicated story. Wolves, lynx, and brown bears were once more widely present across alpine landscapes, but hunting, persecution, habitat loss, and conflict with livestock led to severe declines or local extinctions. In recent decades, all three have returned to some alpine areas, though unevenly and often controversially. The wolf has returned naturally to parts of the Alps, moving through suitable habitat as legal protection and prey availability improved. Wolves are highly adaptable social predators, usually living in packs, though pack size and behavior vary with prey, territory, and human pressure. They mainly hunt wild ungulates such as deer, but conflict can arise when they prey on sheep or goats. Their return raises difficult questions for mountain communities, farmers, conservationists, and governments. Coexistence is possible, but it requires practical measures, compensation systems, livestock protection, public trust, and a willingness to deal with reality rather than fairy tales in either direction. The Eurasian lynx is more secretive. A forest-dwelling cat with tufted ears, long legs, and a short tail, the lynx is a specialist hunter of roe deer and other medium-sized prey. It moves quietly through wooded slopes, often unseen even where it is present. Lynx populations in the Alps remain fragmented in many places, which can make long-term survival difficult. A few animals isolated in separate patches of habitat are more vulnerable than connected populations that can exchange individuals and genes. Brown bears survive or have returned in parts of the broader alpine region, especially in the eastern and southern Alps. Bears are omnivores, feeding on a wide range of foods including berries, roots, insects, carrion, and sometimes livestock or human-associated food if poorly managed. Like wolves, they bring both ecological importance and social tension. The challenge is not simply whether the mountains can support large carnivores biologically, but whether human systems can adapt enough to live alongside them. These predators remind us that the Alps are not only a pretty background for hiking boots and fondue, they are an ecosystem with teeth. A healthy mountain landscape includes herbivores, predators, scavengers, insects, amphibians, birds, fungi, microbes, and plants, all connected. Remove one part, and the balance changes. Bring one part back, and the balance changes again. Smaller animals fill the mountains in less obvious ways. The mountain hare, for example, is adapted to cold environments and changes its coat with the seasons in many regions, turning white in winter for camouflage against snow and brown or greyish in warmer months. This seasonal colour change helps it avoid predators, but it depends on timing. If snow cover changes because of warming climate, an animal in a white winter coat may become more visible on dark ground. Camouflage is only useful when the background cooperates, and backgrounds are becoming less predictable. The rock ptarmigan faces a similar challenge. This cold-adapted bird lives in high mountain and Arctic environments, often using seasonal plumage to blend with snow or rocks. It feeds on buds, leaves, berries, and insects, depending on season. In winter, it may burrow into snow for insulation. Snow, in this case, is not only a difficulty, but also a shelter. A stable snowpack can protect animals from extreme cold and wind. When snow conditions shift, the hidden architecture of winter habitat shifts too. The Alps are also home to amphibians and reptiles, though their mountain lives are easily overlooked. The alpine salamander is especially fascinating because, unlike many amphibians, it gives birth to fully developed young rather than laying eggs in water. This is a useful adaptation in cold mountain environments where suitable ponds may be scarce or unpredictable. The fire salamander, alpine newt, common frog, and other amphibians use wet habitats at various elevations depending on region. Their lives depend on clean water, damp refuges, and seasonal timing. Reptiles, such as vipers and lizards, live on sunny slopes, rocks, and meadows where they can bask. In the mountains, warmth is a resource. A rock warmed by the sun can be as important as food for a cold-blooded animal. The pattern of shade and sun, the angle of a slope, and the availability of shelter can determine where reptiles survive. Then there are the insects, the small citizens of the Alps, doing most of the work and receiving almost none of the applause. Bees, butterflies, flies, beetles, ants, grasshoppers, and countless other invertebrates pollinate flowers, decompose organic matter, feed birds and mammals, aerate soil, and form the base of many food webs. Alpine insects are often adapted to short seasons and cold conditions. Some are dark-coloured, which helps absorb heat. Some fly only during brief favourable weather. Some live close to the ground or in sheltered vegetation where conditions are less severe. Butterflies can be especially visible in alpine meadows, where flower diversity supports rich pollinator communities. But mountain insects are sensitive to changes in temperature, snow cover, land use, and plant communities. If flowering times shift or meadows are abandoned, overgrazed, fertilized, developed, or warmed beyond the tolerance of certain species, insect life changes too. And because so many animals depend on insects, those changes ripple outward. Freshwater animals also belong to the story. Alpine streams, lakes, and wetlands can support specialized invertebrates, fish, amphibians, and microscopic life. Cold, oxygen-rich streams flowing from glaciers and snowfields create particular habitats. Some organisms are adapted to very cold water and unstable channels, living in environments that may seem too harsh for much life at all. As glaciers shrink and water temperatures rise, these cold water systems are changing. Again, the drama of mountain wildlife is not always loud. Sometimes it is happening at the scale of larvae beneath stones. Seasonal movement is one of the great themes of alpine animal life. Some animals migrate upward in summer and downward in winter. Some stay high but change slope, seeking wind-scoured areas where food is exposed. Some retreat underground. Some rely on fat reserves. Some switch diets. Some gather in groups. Some become solitary. The mountain demands flexibility, but it also rewards specialization. The best strategy depends on the species, the weather, the slope, the snow, the predators, and the plants available. Human activity now shapes many of these choices. Roads, ski resorts, settlements, dams, fences, tourism, forestry, farming, and climate change all affect alpine animals. Roads can fragment habitat and make movement dangerous. Winter sports can disturb animals during the season when they can least afford to waste energy. Artificial lighting, noise, and human presence can change behavior. At the same time, protected areas, wildlife corridors, careful forest management, reintroduction programs, and conservation laws can help species survive and return. The Alps are therefore not a simple paradise where animals live untouched by us. They are a shared landscape. Cattle graze near marmot burrows. Hikers pass beneath eagle territories. Roads cut through migration routes. Villages sit beside forests where deer feed and foxes hunt. Conservation in the Alps is not about placing nature behind glass. It is about learning how to leave enough space, quiet, connection, and respect for wild lives to continue. As we travel through the mountains, much of this animal life may remain hidden. A driver might see only the road, the slopes, the trees, the occasional bird crossing the sky. But beyond the edge of the view, marmots may be listening from their burrows. Chamois may be moving through forest shadow. Ibex may be standing on cliffs high above. Eagles may be watching the valley floor. Insects may be working through flowers in a meadow. Salamanders may be waiting under damp stones. A lynx may pass through the trees at night and leave almost no trace at all. That hiddenness is part of the magic. The Alps are not empty when they are quiet. They are full of lives that do not announce themselves to us. Lives measured in feeding routes, nesting ledges, winter dens, burrow entrances, scent marks, migration paths, and the timing of snowmelt. The animals of the high places teach us that survival is not one thing. It can be sleep. It can be speed. It can be camouflage. It can be memory, knowing where the snow melts first or where danger usually appears. It can be cooperation, as in marmot colonies. It can be solitude, as with a lynx moving through forest. It can be flight, as with an eagle riding thermals. It can be balance, as with an ibex on a ledge where no reasonable creature should be standing, and yet there it is, making the rest of us look frankly underqualified. The Alps were made by stone, ice, water, and plants, but animals bring movement to the mountains. They turn slopes into territories, meadows into feeding grounds, cliffs into nurseries, forests into hunting paths, and skies into highways. They are not additions to the landscape. They are part of how the landscape works. And as the road continues through the green valleys and beneath the high ridges, we can imagine the mountains around us not as silent scenery, but as a living web. Every whistle, wingbeat, hoofprint, burrow, feather, antler, and hidden paw print belongs to the same long story. A story of life finding its way upward. A story of bodies shaped by cold, slope, hunger, and season. A story of wildness surviving, retreating, returning, and adapting. The mountains may seem still from a distance, but look closely, dear dreamer. They are moving everywhere. For as long as humans have lived near mountains, they have had to decide what to do with them. Mountains can be shelter. They can be boundaries. They can be sacred places, hunting grounds, sources of water, pasture, timber, minerals, and stories. But they can also be obstacles. They stand between valleys, between climates, between languages, between markets, between armies, between families, and between one possible life and another. The Alps, stretching in their great arc across Europe, have always been more than scenery. They have been a wall, a bridge, a challenge, and a corridor. They have separated north from south, but they have also connected them. The alpine passes have carried almost every kind of traveller imaginable. Traders crossed them with goods. Soldiers marched through them with orders and ambitions. Pilgrims followed them toward holy places, while shepherds, monks, refugees, scientists, tourists, and ordinary families used them to reach the world on the other side. And today, of course, they also carry tired people in cars, heading south toward Italy, and quietly hoping everyone in the vehicle can remain civil until the next coffee stop. To travel through the Alps today, especially by road or railway, can feel almost effortless compared with the past. A tunnel swallows the traffic. A motorway curves along a valley. A bridge carries us over a gorge. A train slips beneath a mountain that once demanded days of climbing. Modern engineering has made the Alps seem more permeable than they really are. But beneath every modern route lies an older story. The story of people finding paths through stone. Long before written history, people crossed the Alps on foot. They followed animal trails, river valleys, ridge lines, and passes where the mountains lowered just enough to allow passage. These journeys were not casual. A crossing required knowledge of weather, snow, water, shelter, and terrain. A path that was possible in summer might be deadly in winter. A slope that looked stable might release rocks or snow. Fog could erase direction. Cold could kill quickly. Yet people crossed anyway. One of the most famous pieces of evidence for prehistoric alpine travel is Ötzi the Iceman, the naturally mummified body discovered in 1991 in the Ötztal Alps near the modern border between Austria and Italy. He lived more than 5,000 years ago, during the Copper Age. His preserved body, clothing, tools, and equipment revealed a world of surprising sophistication. A copper axe, a bow, arrows, a backpack frame, leather garments, plant fibres, and knowledge of high mountain travel. Ötzi was not simply a lost wanderer from a vague prehistoric mist. He was a person moving through a known landscape, carrying technology, food, clothing, and skills suited to the mountains. His story reminds us that the Alps were never completely empty. Even in deep prehistory, people hunted, gathered, traded, herded, and travelled through them. They knew routes that later generations would formalize. They used passes not because the mountains were easy, but because the other side mattered. As farming, herding, and trade developed, alpine crossings became more important. Salt, metal, amber, textiles, wine, livestock, and later luxury goods moved across Europe. Mountain valleys were not isolated pockets cut off from the world. They were part of networks. Some communities lived by controlling, guiding, hosting, or taxing movement. Inns, shelters, mule tracks, and seasonal markets grew around routes. The Romans brought a new scale of organisation to alpine travel. As their power expanded across Europe, they needed routes for armies, administrators, messengers, merchants, and supplies. Roman roads are famous not because the Romans invented roads, but because they built and maintained them with extraordinary ambition. Their road system tied together a vast empire, and in many places, Roman routes influenced later roads, towns, and transport corridors for centuries. The Alps mattered greatly to Rome. Italy lay to the south, while important provinces and frontiers lay to the north and west. To control an empire, Rome needed movement. Soldiers had to march, orders had to travel, goods had to flow. Alpine passes therefore became strategic arteries. Routes over passes such as the Great St. Bernard, Mont Cenis, Brenner, Reschen, Septima, and others connected the Italian peninsula with Gaul, Germania, Raetia, Noricum, and beyond. Roman road building in the Alps required adaptation. In flat country, a road could run relatively straight, raised and drained. In the mountains, road builders faced steep gradients, landslides, rivers, snow, rockfall, and narrow gorges. They cut ledges into slopes, built retaining walls, bridged streams, paved difficult sections, and marked distances. The road still had to obey the mountain shape. Even Rome, with all its confidence and bureaucracy, could not simply command a cliff to become reasonable. One famous Roman alpine route crossed the Great St. Bernard Pass, connecting northern Italy with the upper Rhone region. The pass was known in antiquity and later became associated with pilgrims, travellers, monks, and the hospice that gave shelter to those crossing the high mountains. Another important route was the Brenner Pass, one of the lower and more accessible crossings of the Central Alps, connecting what is now Austria and Italy. Its relative accessibility helped make it one of the enduring north-south corridors through the mountains. The Roman period showed something that would remain true for 2,000 years. Alpine routes were never just local paths. They were political and economic instruments. Whoever controlled a pass could influence trade, military movement, taxation, diplomacy, and communication. After the Western Roman Empire fragmented, Alpine travel did not stop. Roads decayed in some places, but movement continued. The mountains became part of medieval Europe's patchwork of lordships, bishoprics, monasteries, market towns, and emerging states. Passes remained essential for merchants carrying goods between northern Europe and Italian cities. They mattered for pilgrims travelling toward Rome or other holy sites. They mattered for messengers, scholars, craftsmen, soldiers, and seasonal workers. The medieval Alps were not a silent barrier, but a busy, difficult, sometimes dangerous landscape of movement. Pack animals carried goods along narrow tracks. Muleteers knew the routes intimately. Bridges and hospices became vital. Monasteries and religious houses offered shelter in remote places. Local communities maintained paths, cleared snow when possible, repaired bridges, and sometimes profited from tolls and transport services. The Great St. Bernard Hospice, traditionally founded in the 11th century, became famous for sheltering travellers crossing the pass. Centuries later, the St. Bernard dogs associated with the hospice became legendary as rescue animals, though the full popular image is partly romanticised. Still, the reality beneath the legend is powerful. High mountain travel was dangerous enough that organised shelter and rescue became a matter of life and death. The Gotthard route is another central example of how technology and geography shape history. The Gotthard Pass, in what is now Switzerland, connected northern regions toward the Rhine with southern routes toward Ticino, Milan, and the Po Valley. But, for a long time, the pass was not as dominant as it later became because the approach through the Schöllenen Gorge was extremely difficult. The Reuss River cut through steep rock, making passage dangerous and awkward. In the early 13th century, improved bridging through the gorge helped transform the route. The famous Devil's Bridge, surrounded by later legend, symbolises the human struggle to force a passage through a place that seemed almost impossible. Once the gorge could be crossed more reliably, the Gotthard became far more important. It helped connect northern and southern Europe and played a role in the economic and political development of central Switzerland. This is one of the great themes of alpine history. A single bridge can change a region. A gorge that blocks traffic can keep a route marginal. A bridge across that gorge can turn it into an artery. Infrastructure is not just convenience. It reorganizes power. By the later medieval and early modern periods, alpine trade routes were busy with goods such as salt, grain, wine, wool, cloth, metal, cheese, livestock, and luxury products moving between Italian cities and northern European markets. The Alps did not prevent exchange. They concentrated it into particular corridors. These corridors became valuable. Towns along them could grow wealthy. Political powers fought, negotiated, and formed alliances around them. Travelling through the mountains, however, remained slow and uncertain. Weather could close passes. Avalanches could destroy roads. Rivers could wash out bridges. Snowmelt could make crossings dangerous. Bandits and war added human risks to natural ones. A journey that looks short on a map could take days or weeks, depending on season and conditions. Then came the age of improved roads. From the 18th century onward, states became increasingly interested in building carriage roads across the Alps. These were wider, more engineered, and more suitable for wheeled vehicles than older mule tracks. Military needs often pushed road construction forward. Napoleon's campaigns, for example, depended heavily on movement across mountain routes, and the Simplon Pass Road, improved under Napoleon's direction in the early 19th century, became one of the great engineered alpine roads of its time. Roads changed the experience of the mountains. Carriages, stagecoaches, and later motor vehicles could cross where once only people and pack animals had gone. But mountain roads were still dramatic works of engineering. They required switchbacks to manage steep gradients, retaining walls to hold slopes, drainage systems to survive snowmelt and rain, and constant maintenance against rockfall, ice, and erosion. The hairpin bend is one of the classic symbols of alpine road building. It is a compromise between human desire and mountain refusal. We want to go upward. The mountain says fine, but gradually, and with mild terror. So the road folds back and forth across the slope, gaining height in loops. From above, such roads can look like ribbons laid carefully on stone. From inside a vehicle, they can feel like an argument with gravity. The 19th century brought an even greater transformation: the railway. Railways required gentler gradients than roads, making mountain crossings exceptionally challenging. Engineers had to design tunnels, viaducts, spiral loops, avalanche galleries, and routes that climbed through valleys without becoming too steep for trains. To drive a railway through the Alps was not simply to build transport, it was to make a political statement that mountains could be penetrated by industrial modernity. The Gotthard Railway, completed in the late 19th century, became one of the great alpine rail projects. Its tunnel, opened in 1882, ran for about 15 kilometres beneath the Saint-Gothard Massif and was, at the time, the longest railway tunnel in the world. The railway connected northern Switzerland with Ticino and Italy, strengthening trade, travel, and strategic links. It changed Switzerland's place in European transport and helped make the Gotthard one of the continent's most important north-south corridors. Building such tunnels was dangerous, exhausting work. Workers faced heat, dust, water, unstable rock, accidents, disease, primitive drilling conditions, and immense pressure to advance from both sides with precision. The romance of a railway tunnel often hides the human cost. Every smooth modern crossing has a shadow history of labour: miners, engineers, surveyors, cooks, drivers, families, and communities shaped by the work. The 20th and 21st centuries pushed the story further. Road tunnels allowed cars and lorries to pass under mountains rather than climb over passes. Motorways changed the scale of alpine traffic. Tourism expanded enormously. Ski resorts, cable cars, mountain railways, scenic roads, and holiday routes made the Alps accessible to millions. What had once been a dangerous seasonal crossing became, for many travellers, part of a holiday. But accessibility brought consequences. Roads fragment habitats, traffic pollutes valleys, tunnels concentrate movement, tourism transforms economies and landscapes. Mountain communities that once lived from farming, herding, forestry, and local trade became increasingly tied to visitors, transport, and services. The Alps became both more connected and more pressured. Modern alpine tunnels are among the most impressive engineering works in the world. The Gotthard Base Tunnel, opened in 2016, is the longest railway tunnel in the world, running beneath the mountains at a lower elevation than the older route. It allows faster, flatter rail travel through the Alps and is part of a broader effort to shift freight from road to rail. In a sense, it represents the latest chapter in a very old story. Humans trying to make north-south movement easier, safer, faster, and less vulnerable to the weather above. Yet even with tunnels, the old passes remain meaningful. Drivers, cyclists, hikers, and motorcyclists still seek them out for their views, their history, and their drama. The old road over the Gotthard, including the famous Tremolo Road with its cobbled switchbacks, reminds travellers of an earlier age of crossing. To take a pass instead of a tunnel is to choose the mountain's surface rather than its interior. It is slower, but it reveals more. This contrast between pass and tunnel is beautiful. A pass teaches you the shape of the mountain. A tunnel teaches you the ambition of the people who wanted to avoid it. Both are part of alpine history. The road through the Alps is therefore not just a road, it is the descendant of footpaths, animal tracks, Roman routes, mule trails, pilgrim ways, military roads, carriage roads, railway lines, and tunnels. Every modern journey is layered over older journeys. When a car glides through a valley or curves toward Italy, it follows a human longing that is thousands of years old. To cross, to connect, to find what lies beyond the ridge. The mountains forced people to become observant. They had to learn where snow lingered, where avalanches fell, where streams could be crossed, where animals could graze, where shelter could be built, where stone could hold a bridge, where a tunnel might safely pass. Alpine travel is a history of reading the landscape. The people who crossed successfully were not those who ignored the mountains, but those who listened to them. And perhaps that is why mountain roads feel so powerful. They are not straight lines imposed on empty space. They are negotiations. A bend means the slope was too steep. A bridge means water cut the way. A tunnel means the mountain would not yield above ground. A pass means generations discovered the one place where the wall lowered enough to let them through. As we travel now, surrounded by green hills and high ridges, it is easy to forget how astonishing this is. We sit in warmth and relative comfort, moving at speeds that would have seemed impossible to most of the people who crossed these mountains before us. A journey that once required courage, planning, animals, guides, prayer, and very sturdy shoes can now happen with a playlist, a snack bag, and someone asking whether we are nearly there every 14 minutes. But the old story is still present. It is in the valley towns. It is in the passes. It is in the bridges and tunnels. It is in the monasteries, hospices, road signs, railways, and trade routes. It is in the way Europe itself was shaped by the need to cross this enormous mountain arc. The Alps have never been only a barrier. They have always been a meeting place. They divide watersheds, climates, and regions, but they also gather movement into corridors. They have carried armies and pilgrims, merchants and migrants, cattle and cheese, letters and legends, railways and motorways, fear and wonder. And now, as the road continues southward, perhaps toward Italy, we can see the journey differently. The mountains around us are not simply something to pass through. They are the reason the route exists in this particular shape. Every curve and tunnel is an answer to stone. Every bridge is an answer to water. Every pass is an answer to height. The secret life of mountains includes geology, ice, plants, and animals. But it also includes us. Restless, inventive, impatient us. We are tiny creatures beside these ancient cliffs, but we have always looked for ways through them. Sometimes we crossed the mountains for trade. Sometimes we crossed for safety, faith, work, or family. And sometimes we crossed for something harder to name: warmer air, a glimpse of the sea, or simply the feeling that life might be different on the other side. And so, the road carries on. Through valleys carved by glaciers, past forests gripping the slopes, beneath peaks raised from ancient seas, along routes older than maps. The mountains remain vast and quiet around us. But across them, through them, and under them, humans have written their own narrow lines of movement. Not as old as the rocks, not as patient as the glaciers, but persistent all the same.